All right, let's do this. Today, we're diving deep into the 30 Years' War.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is 3 decades of conflict across Europe and millions of casualties.
A real turning point in European
We're
history.
using this article from History.com as our guide, and it
Yeah.
gets wild right from the start.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the war actually kicks off with something called the Defenestration of Prague.
Defenestration. You don't hear that word every day, basically chucking people out of a window.
Right, like out of a window. What was going on in Europe that made things so volatile?
So it's the early 1600s,
Right.
and the Holy Roman Empire is kind of the big dog, but
Right.
it wasn't like a single country, more like a bunch of states loosely connected. And the emperor, well, he wasn't going to be calling all the shots.
I see. So not a super stable situation to start with.
Exactly. And then you've got this whole other layer of tension, Catholics versus Protestants.
Right. The Reformation, all those religious upheavals, things were definitely heating up across Europe.
For a while, they had this kind of truce, the Peace of Augsburg. Basically, each ruler got to decide the religion for their territory.
Live and let live, kind of.
Yeah, in theory.
Right.
But it was always a shaky peace.
A powder keg waiting to explode.
Pretty much, and then, boom, 1618 rolls around and Ferdinand II takes the throne.
Ferdinand II, a major player in all this, right?
Big time. A staunch Catholic, and he wanted to put Catholicism back in charge. Revoke the Peace of Augsburg, the whole thing.
So not a fan of the live and let live approach.
Not at all. And this is where Bohemia comes in. They were mostly Protestant, and they did not like Ferdinand's moves.
Okay, so back to the defenestration. Did someone just lose their temper?
It was more than that. Ferdinand sent these representatives to Bohemia, and the Bohemian nobles, they were furious. They saw it as a violation of their rights and their faith.
And their solution was out the window?
It was a statement, a symbolic act of defiance, like, we're not going to take this lying down.
I guess it got people's attention.
It definitely did. And that's how the Bohemian Revolt began, the first sparks of the 30 Years' War.
So from a local dispute to a continent-wide conflict.
That's how these things often go. Religious lines were drawn, alliances formed. You had the Protestant Union on one side, backed by folks like Sweden and Denmark.
And on the other.
The Catholic League, rallying around Ferdinand with support from Spain.
I remember reading that the Ottomans got involved too.
Yeah, isn't that wild? They sided with the Bohemians.
The Ottomans were Muslim, right?
Exactly. Shows you this wasn't a simple religious war. It was about power, alliances, a whole tangled web.
A real Game of Thrones situation.
Absolutely. And those early years were brutal. Ferdinand's forces were on roll at first, crushed the Bohemian Revolt, even dismantled the Protestant Union.
So advantage, Catholics.
It seemed that way. But the war was far from over. The fighting raged on in the West, with King Christian V of Denmark-Norway trying to hold the line for the Protestants.
Sounds like he had his work cut out for him.
He did. And despite some help from Scotland, King Christian's forces couldn't withstand Ferdinand's armies.
So things weren't looking so good for the Protestants at this point.
It was a tough time for them. They were on the ropes. They needed a miracle.
And I bet you're going to tell us if they got one, but we'll have to wait until next time for that part of the story. Join us for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll see how the 30 Years' War takes even more twists and turns. Welcome back. Last time, things weren't looking so hot for the Protestants. They needed a game changer, someone to turn the tide.
And they got one.
Yeah.
Enter King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden.
Ah, yes, Gustavus Adolphus. I've heard the name, but what's the deal with this guy?
This was no ordinary king. Brilliant military mind, a devout Lutheran, saw this war as a holy mission.
A warrior king leading the charge.
He brought a new energy to the Protestant cause, rallied the troops, pushed back against those Catholic forces.
So he was a good general. That's helpful in a war, I guess.
He was more than just good. Gustavus Adolphus modernized the Swedish army, brought in new tactics, new weapons, and he was charismatic, inspired his troops, built alliances.
Sounds like the whole package. Faith, strategy, charisma. Quite the resume.
He was a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. But this war, it was never straightforward.
Oh, I bet. We've already got Ottomans backing Protestants, so who knows what else is coming.
Well, for example, there's this guy, Albrecht von Wallenstein, a Bohemian nobleman who fought, well, for both sides, actually.
Wait, what? Switch teams mid-game.
Wallenstein was an interesting character, ambitious, ruthless, saw the war as a chance to make his fortune, offered his army to Ferdinand.
So a mercenary?
Kinda. But he drove a hard bargain, wanted free rein to plunder, basically take what he wanted from conquered lands.
Yeesh, that's pretty brutal. So was he a hero or a villain in this whole mess?
It's tough to say. He was a brilliant military leader, no doubt, helped Ferdinand win some big victories, but his ambition, his ruthlessness, well, it caught up with him in the end. Assassinated in 1634.
Wow. Betrayal and intrigue. Sounds like a Shakespearean tragedy.
This war had it all. Shifting alliances, personal vendettas, religious fervor. And speaking of shifting, there was this attempt at peace, the Peace of Prague, signed in 1635.
Peace of Prague. So, did it work? Did everyone just lay down their arms and call it a day?
Huh. If only. This war had a way of pulling people back in. The treaty, it made some concessions to the Protestants, but it didn't solve the core problems, and it actually brought in another major player, France.
France. Hold on. They were Catholic, right? Why would they join a war that was supposed to be about helping Protestants?
That's where the real politic comes in. France and the Habsburgs, they were rivals, big time.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing.
Exactly. France saw this Peace of Prague as a power grab by the Habsburgs, strengthening their influence. So they decided to intervene.
Okay, so France jumps in on the side of the Protestants. Did that tip the scales?
Not really. Instead, it kind of led to a stalemate. Neither side could get a decisive victory, and the war just dragged on.
A war of attrition.
Absolutely. Big battles, though. The Spanish even threatened Paris at one point.
That must have been terrifying.
It was, but the French held them off. Meanwhile, remember all those shifting alliances? In 1640, the Portuguese rebelled against Spain.
The Portuguese. So Spain had a war on their hands within their own empire.
You got it. Stretch them thin, weaken their support for the Habsburgs, and then, get this, Denmark, who'd been with the Protestants, switched sides in 1643.
Wow. What's with all the switching?
It was a complicated time. Religion, politics, personal grudges, it all factored in. And then, in 1643, King Louis XIII of France dies.
Louis XIII. That's a familiar name. Wasn't he the father of the Sun King?
He was. But when he died, his son, Louis XIV, was just a kid. Left a power vacuum in France.
So France in turmoil while this war's still raging on?
Yeah, they kept fighting, had some wins, some losses. Meanwhile, the Swedes were still a major force. They even tried to take Vienna in 1645.
Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire. That would have been a huge blow.
It would have. But the Habsburgs managed to hold them off.
So close. But I bet the Swedes weren't done yet, were they?
Not by a long shot. In 1648, they set their sights on Prague. That's where it all started, after all.
Giving back to the beginning.
The Battle of Prague was the last big showdown of the 30 Years' War. Swedes captured Prague Castle, looted some treasures.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
But even with that victory, they couldn't take the whole city. By this point, everyone was just exhausted.
Decades of war, millions dead. I can't even imagine.
Europe was in ruins, famine, disease. It was horrific. People were desperate for peace. But how do you even begin to untangle all of this?
That's a good question. Guess we'll find out in part 3. Join us next time as we explore the Peace of Westphalia and the long-lasting impact of this brutal conflict. All right, we're back for the final part of our 30 Years' War marathon. Last time, we left off with Europe in ruins, everyone exhausted, and a desperate need for peace.
It was a long road, but they finally got there. 1648, the Peace of Westphalia.
Peace of Westphalia. Kind of a simple name for something that ended such a massive conflict.
Don't let the name fool ya. This wasn't just some truce. It was a whole new order for Europe.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Give us the highlights. What did this peace agreement actually do?
First off, it officially recognized the Dutch Republic and Switzerland. They'd been fighting for independence, and they finally got it.
So new countries on the map. What about the big players, the ones who'd been fighting all this time?
France, they came out on top, that's for sure. Gained territory, solidified their power. Habsburgs, not so much. Spain especially, they took a hit.
Winners and losers.
Right.
But you said this was about more than just borders and power, right?
Oh yeah, this was deep stuff. The Peace of Westphalia, it basically redefined the relationship between religion and politics.
How so?
They established this principle of state sovereignty. Each state gets to decide its own affairs, including religion. No more meddling from outside powers, not even the Catholic Church.
So kind of like whose realm his religion, but on a bigger scale.
Exactly. It's the state now, not just the ruler, calling the shots. Marked a shift from religious allegiance to national interest. And the Holy Roman Empire, well, its days were numbered.
So from a patchwork of kingdoms and empires to a system of independent nations.
That's the direction things were heading. A more modern Europe, you could say. And the crazy thing is, a lot of what we take for granted today about international relations, it goes back to Westphalia.
Wow. So this war, as awful as it was, kind of laid the foundation for the world we live in today.
It's a bit ironic, right? All this bloodshed and chaos, and it leads to, well, not world peace, but a new way of thinking about peace, about how states interact.
I mean, you can't forget the human cost, right? All those lives lost, the destruction.
It's hard to comprehend, honestly. Millions dead, not just from fighting, but famine, disease. Typhus especially, it just ravaged Europe.
And there were those witch hunts too, right? Fueled by fear and paranoia.
It was a dark time. People were desperate, looking for someone to blame. Women, especially those who were different, they became scapegoats, accused of witchcraft, tortured, executed. Awful.
It's tough to see any good coming out of all that suffering.
It's true, the scars are deep. But even amidst the ruins, there were glimmers of hope. People had to confront their differences, find ways to coexist. It was a crucible, for sure, but it forged a new Europe.
So how do we view this legacy? Tragedy or progress? Or maybe both?
I think it's both, honestly. The 30 Years' War was a catastrophe, no doubt about it, but it also led to some profound changes. The decline of religious power, the rise of the nation-state, the seeds of international law. It's a reminder that even out of darkness, sometimes something new can emerge.
Well, that's quite the journey we've been on. From defenestrations to peace treaties, religious wars, to the birth of the modern world.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? Full of twists and turns, heroes and villains, and ultimately, a glimpse into how the world we know came to be.
Thanks for guiding us through it. I think I need a break from war for a while, though.
Me too. But hey, that's history for you, right? Always something new to learn, something to make us think.
That's why we keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with another adventure through the annals of history. Until then, keep those brains buzzing.